We live in a gaming industry where controversy seems to be around every corner. Hell, as I'm finding out rapidly, YouTube's pretty much the same way. Companies are very aware of the effects of positive and negative PR in the gaming world, and they may take reasonable steps to avoid sensitive topics altogether because of possible backlash. On the other hand, some companies won't back down from controversy, letting the original vision of the creators shine through. And in the case of The Witch and the 100 Knight, it's definitely the latter rather than the former. A remastering of the PlayStation 3 Japanese action RPG that released in 2013, The Witch and the 100 Knight Revival Edition comes to the PS4 in both physical and digital form today for North America, and in a couple of days for Europe. It's gotten a fresh coat of paint and a couple of new features on top of the original game, along with a price tag of $39.99. In an era where the RPG is more associated with games like Mass Effect and Skyrim, can The Witch and the 100 Knight Revival Edition make its way out of the murky swamps to deliver a unique story and some complicated but engaging gameplay mechanics? Or will the extra sludge that it tracks in leave the game a mess, unable for you to ignore the smell of its toxic features? That's what I'm here to answer, but before I begin, this review was done with a key obtained from NIS America for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? Let's start with the game's basic premise. You are the 100 Knight, and you've been resurrected and bound via a contract to the Swamp Witch Metalia. Now, you don't know who or what you are, but all you know is that you can go back to your former life if you help Metalia fulfill her wishes. Basically, Metalia's opening goal is to cover the world with her beautiful swamps, which seems to be the only place she can survive. However, the plot gets much more complex as you go along. You'll get subplots regarding the witches of the world, Metalia predicting that she's got only 100 days to live, and various side stories along the way. It's up to you as the 100 Knight to help her, and maybe find out what's truly behind not only Metalia's motives, but your connection to everything as well. Now, for a sidebar. Many of you may be familiar with the Fire Emblem Fates controversy. For those unfamiliar, basically several elements of the game's original dialogue was translated in such a way to lose its original meaning. Now, the reasoning on this is unclear, whether it was purposeful to appeal to a younger audience, or if it was a political move within the Treehouse localization group. But okay, why bring this up in this review? Because The Witch and the 100 Knight is on the other side of that fence, because it's clear that the original plot is intact here, and oh boy is it dark. I'm talking Game of Thrones type of dark here. This game isn't pulling punches at all, and I have to admit, even I was taken aback by some of it. Now look, I like a dark storyline, I really do, and I've grown up in the internet era, so I've seen some of the worst that the world has to offer. But when the game is using dark subject matter like The Witch and the 100 Knight does, it's going to rub some people the wrong way. Now, I may be dancing around what exactly dark here is, but I do typically try to avoid spoilers in general when reviewing a game. But let's just say the Game of Thrones comparison is very, very apt here. However, in order for that dark element of the plot to work, the plot needs a payoff. Being dark for the sake of dark doesn't work unless you have a message or good characterization behind it. And I'm happy to say that the game does deliver here, in my opinion. See, you may play as the 100 Knight, but this game is all about Metalia, and she shines as the anti-hero here. Her Tsunade character may seem cliche at first, but she's got a lot of layers under the surface that play with some complex themes. Her interactions with every character end up revealing a little more about her, and the back and forth she has with Visco in particular was the highlight of the story for me. It's her moments of weakness, the moments that take her from a position of power to a position of a lonely, vulnerable girl, that's really effective here. You see the effect her upbringing had, her isolation, and her desperate need to be validated by the world around her. It tugs on the heartstrings for anyone who was a loner at one point in their life, and I must admit that I got teary-eyed at one particular brutal section of the game. Now, you will question some of the characters' reasonings to keep on interacting with Metalia, as she is a cruel and vicious witch. In particular with Visco, who has a knight's oath to take out witches such as Metalia. Here's the thing about that though. For those who take a story literally and only use the cold hard facts and what they see presented in front of them, then this story may be hard to swallow. The story is working towards a reason for these characters to trust one another. Characters do get reasons to stick around that may not be obvious at first, and if you go into the game close-minded, you're gonna have a bad time. This is a story that you really need to be in for the long haul with, because if you only play the first few hours, you're going to be sitting there going, how the hell can someone write this? That's why as a reviewer, you're obligated to play through as much of the game you can, despite your preconceptions or feelings about the subject matter. Because sometimes you have to truck through the mud in order to get to the other side. And yes, I am hinting at something within this paragraph about reviews of this game. Now, presentation-wise, the game does a decent job. If you've played a Nippon Ichi game before, you should be familiar with the presentation elements here. Despite some of the dark themes, there's a sense of humor and whimsy injected into all things in the game, from the cutscenes to the character visual portrayals. You'll notice small things like Metalia's witch hat actually having ear slots, or the confused look of the Hundred Knight in several situations. The small details are well done here, although I will admit that Metalia needs to put some meat on her bones. Poor girl looks like she'd snap in half. You do get a wide variety of environments here, ranging from the deep and dark forests to the dense city plaza. In terms of interacting with gameplay, it works rather well visually, except when the environments actually get in the way of you seeing what's going on. And that happens a reasonable amount here. The voice acting is typical of the Japanese RPG genre, aka it's very hit and miss in terms of quality. While it does a reasonable job at times of portraying emotion and a character's personality, it can get on the nerves, and to the point where your face is doing the Picard.
Understood regarding the ring, but Master Leah, your stomach...
He's right, Metalia. What's wrong with your stomach? Huh?
Could it be that you are pregnant?
Are you trying to be funny? I'm a damn proud virgin. I probably just ate too much junk. 3 days straight of chocolate would make anyone gain some weight.
Records exist of virgin pregnancies. It is possible, yes.
Now that you mention it, it kind of does feel like something's moving around inside of me. Was this chocolate poisoned? Well, I made sure the dog had some first, so...
Music-wise, the pieces fit well with the themes of the game, but like always, I find music and aesthetics of a game to be some of the most subjective elements behind a review. So rather than to try to analyze the C flats and the B sharps, how about you listen to some of the music and see if it hits your fancy? Sound design wise, it's reasonable. Characters screaming out in pain, appropriate fireball sounds, most everything is here. But the game at one point does go too far with a particular summoning horn, and it's sounding every couple of seconds. It literally had me choking on my chips as I tried to understand why the game decided to keep it going. But okay, let's get to more of what you probably would expect from a Nippon Ichi game, the gameplay. And because Ichi is involved, you can rest assured there's a lot of content and a lot of mechanics stuffed into gameplay. And trying to go over every single one in the confines of a review would probably push the review over 30 minutes. So I'll hit the major points and what stood out to me in general. The game is a more traditional action RPG with hack and slash elements. Now you have 3 loadout slots, which you can equip 5 weapons each in. The Hunter Knight apparently thinks that his weapons need breaks after you swing them, because you swing one weapon at a time and then bring out the next. You have a basic 5-hit combo because of this, along with the ability to spend AP to do stronger attacks. Later in the game, you get the ability to summon Tokaya, which are little monsters that have special abilities, such as being a boomerang of sorts to being a time bomb. And before you say anything, yes, I probably didn't pronounce that right. While it's a little bit more complex than this, your weapons generally come down to a rock, scissors, paper mechanic. Magic weapons, for example, will do well against certain enemies, while not doing well against other ones. And that's where your choice of weapons and weapon loadouts come into play. A quick button press can switch your weapon set, even mid-combo. And this is where the player can get really creative. If you can remember which weapon is in which slot, you can customize your combat using the best weapon for every situation, even if your specific loadout didn't use that to begin with. There's a chain system that enhances things if you use them in the right order, which helps to emphasize user skill. But despite that, you may not find that you really need it in the end. See, the combat doesn't have a lot of depth like other Nippon Ichi titles. While you have things like the Tokaya and the Chaos Revelation mode, you'll be relying on the same slashing of swords, lances, etc. over and over again. It does become somewhat of a grind, even if you aren't leveling for a specific purpose. If you aren't rushing through the game, the difficulty, even on the non-casual side of things, leaves a lot to be desired. Patience is a virtue here, which probably resulted in a bit of deaths for me due to the whole trying to get this review ready for release day. But that's not to say the game was a challenge. It had its moments, but rarely did it deliver in that combat experience over time. I hate to say this as it sounds blasphemous regarding a Nippon Ichi game, but the combat needed more complexity. That may sound ridiculous considering I implied that there's a lot of mechanics to begin with, but it honestly needed something else. Enemies needed more to exploit, some combat mechanics like guard breaking for example. Sure, you get the equivalent of witch time when dodging an attack at the right time, and that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about that the game needed more of. We needed more mechanics like that, but instead, you got combat that doesn't vary that much in the end. Sadly, the enemies is where the game really lacks. The enemies are rather basic and don't have a lot of complication to them, having 2 to 3 attacks that are telegraphed rather easily, and the enemy AI can be rather dumb at times, walking straight into traps that you put down, or were already there. Enemies fall into patterns rather quickly, even bosses, which can be exploited rather easily. It's disappointing after playing a game like Disgaea 5, which was able to do so many things right in complex combat. Granted, these games are different genres, so different strengths and weaknesses are there in the end. Also, a quick shout out to Dynasty Star, as I need to apologize to him after probably botching that pronunciation again. Sorry, man. Now, while you do gain levels and such in the game, a lot of your needed punch will come from your weaponry, and thus, get ready to micromanage. Because with 15 weapons you hold at a time, that means that you'll need to be switching out weapons constantly for the best arsenal. And the bonuses to these weapons are significant, so you can't ignore the fact that you're barely doing damage to an enemy with your 3rd weapon in a combo. Actually, item management as a whole feels like a chore in this game. Can't you remember that I like to have my weapons ranked by rank and auto-sorted for me? Why do I have to organize it every single time? And some of the store's menus implementations make absolutely no sense, making it more complicated than it really needs to be. The big mechanic that's different from your normal action RPG here is the G-Cal meter. This meter represents the flame on top of the 100 Knight's head, and when it goes to 0, it extinguishes. At this point, your attack and defense drop 30%, and basically, you're rather screwed. Basically, the meter acts as a timer of sorts. As you investigate the map, the meter will get used up to see into the darkness, and it will very slowly drain over time regardless. So you'll need to do what you need to do on a map in a hurry, or get to a pillar, aka checkpoint, so that you can save your progress in a level and come back with a full meter. This ties to the bonus system rather closely, as you get bonuses for a map by killing enemies and finding items. Leave the map, and that resets, along with your GCal meter. Now I wish there was a way to actually reset it without having to leave the map, as it does get annoying to have to leave the map over and over again to try to get the biggest bonuses or to just be able to get through the map. But overall, I do like this tie-in for the bonus mechanic, as it does have a risk and reward mechanic that works well. But one of the important other mechanics with the GCal meter that you really need to recognize is the Thousand Knights Chaos Revelation skill. When used, Thousand Knight powers up immensely and is able to do a ton of damage. He basically goes Super Saiyan. But in the process, he also burns through his GCal energy rather quickly. And once he's activated it, you go down to 0 no matter what. You can't reset it or stop the process in question, which is a little bit annoying when you accidentally activate it. And with all the different mechanics in the game that you can activate via a button push, yeah, you will activate this accidentally at least twice through your playthrough. For me, it was about 8 or 9 times. Now, this ability can make certain parts of the game rather easy if you time its usage right. Way too easy. Boss fights become a breeze thanks to this mechanic, rather than an overall test of skill and abilities learned. Sure, there were areas in the game where its usage actually had to be timed correctly, but in most boss cases, popping it, even if you're at a half GCal meter at the start of the fight, would result in victory. The game just lacks the excellence in the combat system that I expect out of a Nippon Ichi title. For example, the game does an alright job on the leveling system, as if you try to avoid fights in certain areas and just move on, it makes the next set of levels that much harder. However, I could easily point out that part of the reason that I did that is the fact that the combat gets majorly repetitive. Then that is enhanced by some of the exploration nightmares that the game throws at you. Sometimes the game throws a task at you in a level to destroy certain objects in order to move on. Okay, great, except you don't tell me where they are. And considering the respawn rate of enemies in this game, it had me just running by them because I was getting annoyed with it. I got tired of hacking and slashing my way through it. And this is someone who generally likes the Dynasty Warrior games. That should say something. One of the new additions of the game has to do with an optional dungeon, where you put a weapon on the line and try to upgrade it by going through floor after floor. Now, while I admit it can give some reasonable boost to weapon power here, it's not required in the slightest, and its implementation leaves a lot to be desired. In particular, having to load on every floor is annoying as hell. Although, you can play as Metalia here, and well, that's a nice change of pace, and was really appreciated. It does help to maximize your character for typical RPG fans out there, so it is worth the extra money if you're considering the Revival Edition. When it comes down to it, The Witch and the 100 Night Revival Edition was an experience I did enjoy, although it's definitely a bumpy road along the way. Despite other reviewers blasting the dark storyline, this story does have a lot of interesting layers built into it, and those patient for it will get a payoff in the end. And while the combat system has some interesting mechanics to it, it just doesn't have the lasting impact like other games in the genre. It's unique, however, despite that, and it comes in at a 72 out of 100 on my buyability scale. Which means that if you're looking for a game desperately and this game fills your niche, it's worth a purchase. However, those not hurting for an experience right now will want to wait for a sale of some sort. But that doesn't take into account my enhancer system. If you don't know what that is, I'll leave a link in the description below that gives a brief description of what I'm talking about. But without further ado, here are my enhancers. Add 10 to the score or take 20 away from the score depending on the appeal of a dark storyline. This is what will lead to people really hating or loving this game. As mentioned, the story is not only dark, it can get downright depressing at times. Those who are sensitive to touchy topics like slavery, like rape, they need to go far away from this game. But I will honestly say that those who are open to exploring the darkest elements of the human condition will find a game that does have a good tale to tell. Add 5 points if you need a time waster. There's a lot to do in The Witch and the 100 Night Revival Edition. The main storyline takes 30 plus hours in order to beat, and that's if you don't try to 100% all the areas and skip the optional towers. Needless to say, if you need something that will bring the content regardless of what the quality of the content is, don't worry, The Witch and the 100 Night Revival Edition has you covered. Take off 3 points if you hate micromanaging skills and weapons. You've got 15 weapons to always have equipped, and you'll need to swap weapons back and forth in certain cases to deal with new threats that the game throws at you, due to the rock, paper, scissors-like mechanics. This is somewhat an Upon Ichi staple of sorts, as a lot of their games have this level of depth and complication. But if that doesn't appeal to you, I'd look elsewhere. Anyway, that's The Witch and the 100 Night Revival Edition. The next games on the plate for the channel are Danganronpa, yes, this is still happening, Life is Bunker, and Bazir. One last note. If you like the content of this review and want to see this kind of content continue, consider a donation to the Patreon page in the description below. This will allow me to focus on making more content going forward, and not having to worry about putting food on the table in other ways. Anyway, this is Dryadnick signing out, hoping that he never gets changed into a rat and uses a toy for witches to play with. I'll see you later, and as always, keep on gaming. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you want more content like this, hit that subscribe button. I do have a Twitter handle, a Google Plus account, and a Facebook group that you can find in the description below. If you want to see more work like this, you can check out the last video on the top left and a related video to this in the top right. And you can always support my work via Patreon. Thanks for watching, and keep on gaming.